Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel today. My name is Elizabeth Shantz, and I'm the Knowledge Mobilization Manager for the Research Innovation Office at the University of Guelph. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that the University of Guelph resides on the ancestral lands of the Etowonderan people, and more recently, the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We recognize the significance of the Dish with One Spoon covenant to this land, and we offer our respect to our Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis neighbors. Since we are all joining this panel from various locations across Canada and internationally, I'd like to invite you to take a moment to consider the history of the land on which you reside. So as I said, I'm here today representing the University of Guelph, and the University of Guelph is located in Guelph, Ontario. We are a comprehensive and research-intensive university with a history dating back more than 150 years. We have over 800 faculty members across 7 colleges, and we build on a legacy of agriculture, food, and veterinary science with a focus on putting knowledge into action to improve life as Canada's food university. What we're here to talk about today is one of the unique programs that we run. So the University of Guelph Policy Fellowship Program in Agriculture, Food, and Biodiversity is the first of its kind in Canada. It is modeled after a similar program at the University of Cambridge and a second one at the University of Frankfurt. And we are the third international university that's offering this program. Now, the Policy Fellowship Program is designed to connect decision makers in policy, industry, and non-governmental organizations with faculty and University of Guelph experts focused on issues related to agriculture, food, and biodiversity. So the goal of this program really is to stimulate conversation and dialogue about research, programs, and ideas to support knowledge exchange between science and policy. So as I said, the goal of the program really is to connect decision makers with relevant academic experts. What we're trying to create is an opportunity for unstructured dialogue and knowledge sharing. So this is an opportunity for knowledge sharing on two fronts, we think. It's not only an opportunity for researchers to share more about cutting edge research, but it's also an opportunity for decision makers to share more information about the challenges that they experience and the programs and opportunities in their organization. So it really is an opportunity to both support evidence-informed decisions as well as policy and practice-informed research, sharing knowledge both ways. Above all, we also see this program as an opportunity to build preliminary connections and networks between faculty and decision makers who have shared areas of interest. We want to support their ability to connect both now with the current conversations, as well as to create networks that they can draw in the future as needs might arise. It's also an opportunity for decision makers working in similar areas to know one another and engage in conversation. So how does it all actually work? So before the program begins, applicants will submit a series of around 4 to 6 questions that they would like to discuss over the course of their fellowship. Whoop, I'm going to go back here. There we go. We use the information, the questions that they submit, to match them with faculty and other experts on our campus. Depending on what the question is, we'll often also make a concerted effort to cross disciplinary boundaries as well. So we have a huge amount of relevant expertise in the Ontario Agricultural College and the Ontario Veterinary College at the university. These are just two powerhouses of knowledge in agriculture and food. But over the course of the fellowship, we'll also try to connect our fellows, our decision makers, with faculty from the social sciences, from our business school, from the School of Engineering and Physical Sciences, biological sciences, and even the College of Arts where relevant. And we really think that this is a unique opportunity to make connections across disciplinary silos and to apply knowledge from other sectors into the agriculture, food, and biodiversity sectors. So we offer this program both in person as an intensive experience offering somewhere in the range of 10 to 12 meetings that are spread over 3 days. And twice a year, we also offer it virtually, which offers a similar number of meetings, those 10 to 12 meetings, but spread out over 8 weeks to reduce eye strain from all of the virtual meetings that need to happen. And we offer 3 cohorts of the program per year with up to 12 fellows involved in each cohort. The individuals, the fellows involved in the program are decision makers who come from federal, provincial, as well as local governments. Some come from industry, some come from other non-governmental or community organizations. The similarity here is that each decision maker is working in an area related to agriculture, food, and/or biodiversity. To date, we have involved more than 50 fellows from across 5 federal agencies, 6 provincial governments, and a number of other industry and other organizations across Canada. The program has seen excellent feedback. We've really heard that it seems to be filling a niche that's been a little bit unfulfilled to date. We see many fellows and faculty reporting that they very much enjoyed the meetings, that they got a lot out of it. Many of our fellows have reported the knowledge and the contacts that they made during the program will help to inform practice decisions, both their own and within their organization, as well as enabling them to support evidence-informed policy. As you see here with the testimonials from our past fellows, the opportunity to sit down one-on-one with subject matter experts is really of significant value. And what we think is really unique about this program is the very tailored nature of the meetings that are offered, as well as the opportunities to sit down with others with similar interests, other experts, and not just for presentations and more of a one-way push of information, but really for true dialogue around topics that are often tricky and complex. And it's also the opportunity to bring your challenges to the table, for our fellows to bring their challenges to the table and to discuss them with faculty as well as other fellows who have shared areas of interest. So that's kind of an overview of what the program looks like at the very basic level. Now, this program is supported by Food from Thought, which is a 7-year, $77 million grant from the Canada First Research Excellence Fund at the University of Guelph. With this support from Food from Thought, we've been able to create, grow, and refine this fantastic program over the last 3 years. And we really think that now is the time to bring this program up, to share it with others. So as I said, we think that this program is an excellent opportunity to support knowledge exchange and relationship building between science and policy. So what we've done for you today is we've invited several of the people who have been involved in the Policy Fellowship Program, one from the faculty side and 3 of our past fellows, our decision makers, to be here with us today. And we're inviting them to share more about why they think this program might be necessary, to tell us what their experience was like as they took part in it, and really to share what about this program makes it work. And we're hoping that we can share some of these transferable elements that make this program so effective with others, with you in the audience who are also working in the nexus of science and policy. So with that, I'd like to start by introducing all of our panelists today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll get all of our panelists up here on screen. So what we're going to do after these introductions is we're going to move into a fireside chat style discussion. And after that, we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. So if questions occur to you as we are speaking, I invite you to drop them into the live Q&A box throughout the session, and then we'll address them all at the end. So our 4 panelists today, Nardia Ali is the Manager of Compliance Promotion and Expert Support with the Environmental Protection Operations Division of Environment and Climate Change Canada for the Ontario region. She's a national lead for nuclear expert support in Environment and Climate Change Canada and has been with the federal government for over 25 years in various positions involving environmental protection programs. Nardia was a fellow in the 5th cohort of our program that took place in February and March of this year. Our second panelist is Bernard Canton, who is the Director of the Policy Analysis Division for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. He has been involved in the research policy nexus for quite some time. He's worked on issues ranging from water to climate change and agricultural policies. Bernard was a fellow in our 6th cohort of the program that took place this summer. And among other questions, he spent some time discussing the challenges in science policy integration with others across campus. So we're looking forward to hearing his insights as well. Our third speaker is John Cranfield, who is the Associate Dean for External Relations in the Ontario Agricultural College at the University of Guelph, as well as a professor in the Department of Food, Agricultural and Resource Economics. His research focuses on the economics of consumer behavior and demand analysis at the individual, household, and market level. Now, John has been involved in, I would say, every single cohort of the Policy Fellowship program that we have run to date. He's shared his research and offered insights through a number of discussions with various fellows. So we're really excited to hear his thoughts on the program from the faculty side today. And finally, Katie Sandu is currently the Director of Food Safety and Inspection, and also the Director of the Value Added Branch, including the Food Development Center and Business Development section with Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. So Katie was also a fellow in our 6th cohort, which took place this summer. So as you can see, we have some wonderful fellows and faculty who are joining us today to talk about their experience in the program, and we thank them all very much for their time. So I'm going to start with a question to all of our panelists. We know, all of us here who are speaking and all of those of us who are in the audience today know that it's important to better integrate between science and policy to support exchange of ideas and build bridges across silos. But we know that this can be very complex as well. So we're hoping that each of you can tell us a little bit about the challenges that you have experienced in your own careers as you try to share information between science and policy, whether you have been working more on the policy side or more on the science side or somewhere in the middle. So I'll start with Nardia first. Nardia, could you tell us what are the challenges that you've experienced in science policy integration so far?
Okay, so first, thanks to Elizabeth and University of Guelph for allowing me to speak today, and for also the benefit to the fellowship program, which I really enjoyed. So the challenge that I have found with some of my work in trying to integrate research with policy development is good. One big challenge is good synchronization of research with policy development, and what I mean by that is that there's always a challenge in ensuring that the right connections are made and that we're aware of research being conducted, and the reverse side, that researchers are aware of how they can contribute to this policy development. And the other thing is that every organization has different types of policies with contracts and timelines and things like that. And those are always a challenge, say you decide to do collaborative work. So those are two of the key things. And I think that a standard step, maybe in some of our policy development, because I would, as you know, I'm Environment and Climate Change Canada, so it would be on the environmental sustainability side, would be for when we're developing policy that could need new research methods or new technologies or whatever, that there's some way to maybe poll universities to find out what type of research is being done so that we can approach these people. And I'm seeing that happen in Environment Canada. Like recently, our people working on legislation related to methane reductions, I said to them, you should really be consulting with University of Guelph, because they have this long-standing history and reputation with agri-food. And I mean, say you were writing a policy, it would be good to know on what reductions are possible from things like new feed formulations to reduce methane production by cows, because that was one of the profs I had on my fellowship. It was very interesting conversation. So things like that. And another thing is, like, when we're measuring pollutants, it's good to know what we can actually detect in the environment. So analysis methods, from, say, chemistry departments, things like that. So I would say those are some of the key challenges. making the right linkages, and also being able to access the research information in time for the policy development. Because one thing I had encountered in the past is not being able to access certain data because it wasn't reviewed and it hadn't been published yet, because a lot of the researchers want to make sure that they're in a peer-reviewed journal before they release their information. So that has been a challenge in the past. And that's all I can think of at this point. So thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Yes, I think all of those, the timelines, the access, as you said, those are all challenges that we encounter. Bernard, what are the challenges that you've encountered in your career so far at the Science Policy Nexus?
There are a few. Nadia presented some of them. I might repeat it a little bit. And by the way, thanks also for inviting me here and for allowing me to participate in this program. So, yeah, certainly one of the main challenges is timing, having the evidence when we need it. And, you know, for us, as long as it is methodologically sound and relevant, we don't really care where it comes from. The other side of the coin is trying to anticipate the knowledge that will be needed for policy in the future. And that's not only for academia, but also for policy research, policy people, trying to be a bit in front of what's going on. And of course, working with the potential users of that future policy information is a challenge. Trying to identify, you know, and government people move around. And it's very difficult to make sure that knowledge that is produced either in academia or within government is going to be available when it is going to be needed. Related to that, it's knowing where the evidence might be. And I think this program touches a bit on that, not only a bit, actually, a lot. So making sense of information in the short term is also can be difficult. Questions, the way in which policy asks a question and the way in which academia asks questions is a bit different. Sometimes I notice from the policy side that there is a tendency to do shortcuts in the sense of going to find researchers, academics who have a good reputation, but may not be doing the type of research that is needed right now. The dialogue between science and policy can sometimes be a bit difficult to have. It's getting better, but I think the goal of academia and researchers and universities is to find truth. You know, whether it's possible, that's another question. But I think that's what drives research. In policy, evidence is one among multiple components to consider. Though it's very important, but there are many other factors that come into consideration. And our role as public servants is not to find truth, it's to develop and define potential options for decisions, and these will change over time. So the dialogue around that can be difficult. So there are moments in the policy development process where dialogue has to be cut off, and in general, so that can be frustrating for academia for sure. The requirement to publish in academia leads sometimes to a bit of difficulties, because the requirements for publishing are certainly not the same for evidence gathering for policy. So the incentives researchers have in general in universities may not lead them to choose the type of topics that might be relevant for policymaking, or translating that knowledge for policymaking may be a bit awkward sometimes. So need to figure out how the dialogue can be built and set some incentives that make sense. So to conclude, sorry, I'm taking a bit of time, but looking at policy research in government, there are limitations as well. So depending on the policy area, there might be limited understanding of and therefore acceptance of the multiplicity of methodologies available to analysis. So people in government are trained in a certain way, and that's it. You know, they don't follow the methodological development. So there's a bit of learning I have found that is sometimes difficult to to do with people in government. And there's sometimes a bit of, and that's my pet peeve, but there's a bit of fixation on hardcore quantitative analysis, not looking at other possibilities in terms of gathering evidence, and that sometimes is a problem, but that's a government problem in my mind. So maybe looking forward, I think one of the key challenges I see in government, and it's getting better in academia, is what's covered under transdisciplinary work, really focusing on issues and looking at different ways in which that issues could be understood from different disciplines. It's been talked about a lot, and I know there are developments, but I don't see a lot in government, at least not in the fields I've been involved in. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Bernard. No, I think that transdisciplinary piece is so important. I mean, I know there's so many learnings, it's a government problem. I think it's breaking down these silos is a challenge that we struggle with universally. Finding the time to meet one another and talk and have these dialogues. So no, it's absolutely a challenge that I think stands across academia, government, and other sectors, for sure. And please don't apologize for taking more time to explore these challenges. I think that if we don't take the time to explore what these challenges are that we're all experiencing in science policy, we're not, I think a lot of the times we might assume what they are, but without exploring them in more depth, we're not able to design something that adequately meets those challenges and overcomes them. And I think that that's what all of us are trying to do here. So thank you. John, I'm going to turn to you now. And obviously you come more from the academic side of things, and you've had, a broad and varied career in that space. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the challenges that you've experienced.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you, Bernard and Nardia, because I think you guys have captured a couple of things that I was actually going to say. So one challenge that I found in my career is the timescale and incentives that academics typically work around. Unlike some sectors of the economy, we can't necessarily react very quickly. If we have to go out and get a grant to do work, we have to get a grad student lined up. We go through the research. You then go through publication. So it's sort of beginning to end can take 3 years. That time scale is sometimes misaligned with the time scale where policy is needed and policy action is needed. So I think to Nardia's point, making sure that we've got people plugged in to understand the synchronization and what's happening in our own local ecosystems and where those ecosystems overlap with people working in a public policy space is very important, because those are the natural connections that happen. And to Bernard's point, and I think a little bit to your point, Elizabeth, finding the time and the place, in the pre-COVID times, having a workshop where people can come together, where the academic community and the public policy community can come together and have conversations, can be very productive. Agriculture Canada, for a number of years, supported a group of policy research networks related to agriculture, food, and the environment. All of the agricultural universities in Canada were involved in that. It was a very productive experience, because part of the program forced the academic community and people working on the government side of public policy to come together and have conversations. And so we could get that alignment. And so it's about making sure that we get that those connections that can happen in a meaningful and timeful way. That's really important. Bernard also touched on, I think, and so did Nardia, on some issues around the incentives on where people do research. George Akerlof, who's a well-regarded economist in the United States, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, so he's not dumb. He's been around the block a number of times. He recently had a paper in the Journal of Economic Literature where he talks about, and this is more from an economics point of view than from a broader social science point of view, so I don't want to paint too broad of a brush, but he often talks about, or in this piece he talked about, economists focusing more on hard technical problems, technical from a modeling point of view, rather than a problem that's necessarily important from a broad civil society point of view. And the tension that's there. And I see an intersection of those two things around what he calls the hard and the soft technical issues versus the important and the unimportant issues. And again, I think there's the need there to have conversations around who's doing what research around new methods that allow us to discover truth with more accuracy, versus who's doing research that allows us to come up with some relatively quick answers around important issues where a decision needs to be made quickly. And those two things are somewhat incongruent with each other. And so making sure that we can find a mechanism to have conversations so that we can explore, who's got the better mousetrap versus who's got a great mousetrap already, and they're looking to find a way of uncovering some truth around a policy issue that matters to a great number of people. I think the last challenge I'm gonna flag is not necessarily from communicating with government, but I've had a lot of experience in my career communicating with producer organizations, agricultural producer organizations, in the evaluation of their checkoff and levy programs to support either research or marketing activities. And at various points, you're either having a presentation with a staff team, so executive directors and the commodity organization staff, or boards of directors. And often those boards of directors, they won't have economics training or training in a particular discipline. And so it's about finding the right language and finding the way to make the research accessible, especially if they start asking questions about methods. So you can talk about the high level research results that, every dollar invested in this program resulted in this particular outcome. But if they start asking questions about the methods, the academic will typically fall back into, at least the ones I've known, and I've done this myself, fall back into, I'm going to talk about all the statistics and statistical analysis. And you can sort of see this glazing over of faces because, most people aren't necessarily concerned about that. I do think that's an important issue. We do need to make sure that the right methods are being used. Otherwise, we're going to get biased policy action. But making sure that we've got a way to communicate with people who are making either public policy decisions or policy decisions on behalf of producer organizations or non-government organizations is really important. We need to make our research accessible. One of the best compliments I've had in my career was presenting to a board of producers, and one of them put their hand up and said, "Well, you don't talk like an economist." And at first I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. But I actually, that's something that I really appreciated, because it meant that the message was clear and understandable and approachable by a broader audience. So yeah, time scale, hard versus important problems, and making sure that research is accessible to people who need to make the decision.
Thanks so much, John. Yeah, I think, all good points. And this issue of accessibility, you're absolutely right. It's something that's an issue. And I mean, agri-food, I think, as a sector is an interesting one, because it is so complex. As you said, there are so many different sectors, so many different groups and individuals across the country. And it's not just a matter of communicating with policy, it's also a matter of communicating with industry, with producers, with associations. It's such a complex industry, and there's so many different touch points, from food security through to climate change, through to many other things are related to the areas of ag and food. So no, you're right. It's so complex, and the issue of making our research accessible, which of course is not a typical component of our academic training, is so very important. Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you to echo what you've heard so far, or talk about other challenges that you've experienced in your career.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks again to you and the group for this opportunity today to come and share some thoughts. My colleagues here on the screen have touched on a lot of the topics that I was also going to share from my end. During my work in the public sector, I often pause and reflect on the science policy interface, because we regularly come across this junction. And the challenges we find that, are associated from public sector standpoint is in terms of the exchange of information between the two areas, I feel. And as we know, both John and Nadia and Bernard also touched on the topic that we know research gives us the evidence, it gives us the facts. And as policymakers, we rely on that information to make our decisions, which leads to public policy positions. But policy also influences, on the other hand, science in terms of what research is exactly needed. So in theory, we'll all agree that evidence-based policymaking is critical, it's needed, it's very important. But practically, in the public sector, I see the gaps, and the main challenge I've come across is the differences in the mandates. So we see mandates of science and public sector policy being driven differently and not necessarily always aligned. For example, in public sector, we get our mandate letters. And as you know, Speech of the Throne lays down the foundation for a lot of the work that we do. And of course, it touches the academic priorities as well. But usually we see that they're not fully aligned and speaking in the same time frame. Also, in public sector, as policymakers, sometimes we have to address issues and come up with policy solutions for the issues that may be politically driven or media driven. And I think Bernard mentioned, sometimes we're looking for quick solutions, which means there may not be enough time for a good, thorough research on a topic from a science perspective. And research does take time, rightfully so. So we feel it may not always be an available resource in the policymaker's toolkit. And, we just, the challenge ends up coming to communications. And you also mentioned, Elizabeth, about breaking down the silos. So that's really it. When we understand what the issue is, why is there a gap in the communication? Why is there a gap in the timing? And how can we best work towards addressing those gaps? So those are some of the challenges. And again, working through this program helped us not only understand some of those challenges, but also gave us excellent food for thought in terms of what could we do in our roles to bridge that gap. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you to all of you. I mean, I think, as I said, it's so important to explore what these challenges are, because I think that the way this program has been designed is at least in part, at least as a very early start to address some of those things. And so teasing out, what we have experienced, why we need to better integrate between science and policy, and what works, as I said, it really helps us design better programs in the long term. So on that question of why do we do this? So I'd like to take a moment, just a very quick moment, to explore this in a little bit more detail. So for each of you, I'm hoping you can tell me a little bit about why it is important in your perspective, in your world, to better integrate science and policy. So what are the outcomes? What are the impacts that you are hoping to achieve by participating in the Policy Fellowship program, by working to integrate science and policy? So Bernard, I'm going to turn to you first for this one.
Yes, and I'm going to unmute myself and find my notes. Okay, sorry. I think two contextual elements are important here. The first, as I said before, our job, the public sector and policy, is to develop and inform options. So as science evolves, the range of options available may change, and it is crucial that we have as much access as possible to that knowledge. You mentioned climate change and agriculture, which is a very complicated issue, and getting in the forefront. Another contextual element is part of my work for the past few years has been to work with other OECD members to drive a policy research agenda for the members. And in the past 2 years, the work has moved into food systems framework, which is quite new for ag departments. Government departments where it's traditionally oriented a bit differently. So I'm not. I don't have a background in agriculture for one thing, and the other thing is that framework was a bit new. So I'm in my job, I'm trying to make sense of what it means, and I understand conceptually. My way to translate the food systems approach is really a macro sustainable development lens where you identify the social, economic, and environmental components of and linkages with agriculture production and consumption and food production in general. And we're trying to identify trade-offs, synergies, and things like that. So it's super interesting, but there are lots of science fields involved there, and there it becomes a bit of a difficult dialogue to figure out how each piece fit together, and actually within the governments, as with the food policy, different departments have different, in Canada, the different elements of the food policy have different leads. So it creates a need to have that understanding, but it's difficult to get at. So at the end, to summarize, I think it's really, for me, the purpose is really to stay informed, to know who's doing what, if to the extent possible, to understand how the thinking around those issues is evolving, and to understand the difference between ideology and knowledge and facts here. The food systems work. There was a food summit, international summit recently. All sorts of positions presented there. What are they based on? You know, what are the strengths of the different positions? What is the knowledge base for that? It's not always obvious to be clear about that. And from a public servant perspective, you know, everything is okay. You know, we understand the ideology, but we need to know what the facts are, what the science is. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. No, I think that as you said, the food system lens is such an interesting question, way of thinking, and I think it's interesting too how we're adopting all these different ways of thinking and approaches. And as you said, science is kind of a way that can help us to understand options. I really like that perspective. So I'm going to turn now to John. John, I'm hoping you can offer your insight on this question. You know, why is it important that we do this, and what is it that you hope to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I fully concur with the importance of the options and testing those options and against the evidence. And part of that to me is about making better informed decisions. I mean, ultimately, that's what we want, is for the policy decisions that are made and then the impact that those have to be well informed. Why is that important, you might wonder? And I think it's important from two different perspectives. One is policy often promulgates regulation and or actions, and those actions are typically funded through public sector, and we need to make sure that we're taking policy action that is respectful and is stewarding those scarce resources. We want to make sure that the money that we spend on policy action is well spent and is achieving the intended outcomes that we seek. I think another reason why we want integration between science and policy, and this is the flip side of that coin, is sometimes the unintended consequences from policy don't rear its head until after the policy is implemented. Not to paint all policies with that brush, but you know, we do have unintended consequences of policies, and sometimes going through a research project will help understand what some of those unintended consequences might be, and what some of those unanticipated consequences might be. And so I think those are two really important points for me, is about the resources and making sure that we're spending money wisely and in a way that is respectful of the fact that it's typically on the taxpayer's back, but making sure that we can identify what those unintended consequences are so that we can anticipate what might happen. I think the third point I want to make in this is, and I hope it doesn't seem a bit facetious, but we want evidence-based policy making so that we don't have populist or policy-based evidence making. You know, we're in an era in some parts of the world where populism is on the rise, and with that populism comes particular views on the way the world ought to be, and that can sometimes be promulgated through policy action, and the policy action isn't necessarily one that would be supported by the evidence. And so we want to make sure that the policies that are being pursued, and I'm not saying that's happening in Canada, that's not what I mean at all, but we do need to be mindful of the fact that it's the evidence that drives which one of those options floats to the surface as having the greatest desirable impact, and or the least undesirable impacts in terms of those unintended consequences. So it's really it's a way of trying to sort through those options in a systematic way and letting the data help inform some of those decisions that have to be made. And one last piece, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. As an economist, one of the things I've really appreciated about being involved in the Policy Fellow program is the importance of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary perspectives on those policy options. It's not just about dollars and cents. there's sociological issues, there are political science issues, there's political issues, there's a whole raft of issues that kind of filter into this. And so making sure that we're not just solely focused on a dollar and cents decision point, but one that actually reflects different parts of civil society, and making sure that we're mindful of that when we're making the selection of, of those options, which one would achieve the outcome in the way we want.
Thanks so much, John. Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of the really interesting aspects of this program. And as some of you mentioned in your reply to the previous question, I mean, the issue of access and even finding out who these people are and how to contact them, it's a challenge. It really is, and it's so important to do to have these discussions, to have this dialogue amongst disciplines, breaking down, amongst sectors. So no, I absolutely agree. Katie, I'm going to turn to you for your answer to this question. Why is it important to integrate science and policy, and what do you hope to achieve?
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'll echo a lot what Sean and Bernard have already shared. From my perspective as well, it's really important for us to be better integrated, better aligned. We have seen and we know that science evidence-based decisions in the policy world, they are more sustainable. They have a long-term positive impact. They're more resilient to other changes or other variables that may be coming into the picture. And in the end, the policy decisions that are well demonstrated to be based on science, based on evidence, and communicated that way also strengthen trust in the society in those decisions, which is really important because that's our audience. That's who is on the other end of the spectrum receiving and being impacted by these decisions. So it's really important to demonstrate that the two areas are well integrated and how they are well integrated. So again, from research, as policymakers, we get the evidence, we get the facts, and then we make informed decisions. Like John mentioned, we have to have that evidence-based decision making in the policy world. But how from the policy world, we better integrate with science in informing the key issues? And not just the issues in terms of the topics of those issues, but why are those issues key? Why are those relevant? What's in the current environment in the society that are making those issues relevant? And what some of the competing priorities around those issues would be? Because in public sector, we often work on the competing priorities or around them or with them. So in research, how could we take it level, multi-dimensional, so that we can look at the economic impacts, the societal impacts, the political impacts of the decisions that could be made and bring them all together to demonstrate that they have been reviewed. It's not easy. And again, like we discussed earlier, it's the timing. How soon do we need the decisions? Who's waiting for them? And how the two areas can work together to give that without working in isolation. So again, to sum it up, I feel if we want to bring a sustainable change in society, we need to better demonstrate the integration between science and policy.
Thank you, Katie. No, I completely agree with everything that's been said so far. I mean, of course I do, but I think you're right, that trust issue, especially as we look at, some elements of the population where trust in science is not as strong. Making sure that we're able to demonstrate what science lies behind the decisions that are being made. It's so important, and explaining what's happening in the world of science, of academia, and showing that those decisions are being made with unbiased evidence behind them. I think you're right. It's so very important. Last but not least, I'm going to turn to Nardia. Nardia, would you like to comment on this question of what you're hoping to achieve and why it's important to integrate science and policy?
Okay, so I had put down a few points, some of which have already been addressed in some shape or form. So, I mean, I think what I've heard from my colleagues on the panel is that Science, like integrating science with policy, helps our policy to be more realistic, to have achievable goals, and to have this and defined timelines for the actions we need to take, as from a government perspective. I like the point that Katie raised about the independence of the evidence, because trust is a big thing in Canada right now for many and all aspects of what we do. So that the independence of data generated by the academic community and universities, that is really important for us to integrate. And as I mentioned before, having the best, or being aware of the best research to give us the best methodologies that we put into our policy and regulations, that is really key. And then I'll just go on the economic side. Government has several kind of funding programs, and it's important to know the best science or the best technologies in order to better prioritize that kind of funding. And I'll give you an example. So people know that COP26 just happened, and to achieve net zero, they did talk again about small modular reactor technology, which I am engaged in as part of my work. And there's limited resources for some of these technologies to be developed. So it's a good idea, for government to be aware of which ones are closest, because we do have timelines to meet, like 2035 for clean electricity, 2050 for climate change targets. So so integration is also important to know, or to help prioritize support. And also when we're doing, like, even before we take on policy development, if we know we have gaps, it'd be nice to have that integration with researchers to sort of get them to prioritize their research to what we need. So it's to sort of work it both ways. And the last thing I want to say is that my experience, and this actually has been at the University of Guelph many years ago, when we had we used to have pollution prevention working groups in Environment Canada, where we had multi-stakeholder groups. And one I had worked with at the University of Guelph was aquaculture, and we had another pollution prevention project on livestock manure. So agri-food related. And we were able, through those groups, to fund some master's degree projects. So we helped out students, and we in the government got a lot of work for very little resource, because the university was able to get work done, with use of students, and also benefit those students in their education. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nardia. Thank you to all of you for your insights and answers to these questions. So what I would like to do right now is turn a little bit more directly to the Policy Fellowship Program to hear about what your experience has been like. So what were some of the key highlights that you've experienced when you took part in the program? What were any of the key learnings that you learned that you have been able to apply to your own work? And are there any impacts or changes that you think may result from your experience in the program? So, John, I'm going to turn to you to answer this question first. You've been involved in, I would say many meetings of this program. What has your experience been like, and what are some of your key highlights from those?
Yeah, it's been an incredibly fantastic experience. The conversations always are thought-provoking and stimulating, and more often than not, I at the end of the conversation, I'm sort of madly scribbling down a bunch of ideas around research topics, because these are important issues, and you can start to see a pathway around those conversations into something that would help inform better policy. I think that from the faculty side of it. One of the things, and this is maybe a bit of a fuzzy for me, but I'm going to say it anyways, is knowing that my research matters, that people care about the research that you're doing. They may not care about, how big your sample size is and what statistical estimator you used, but they might care about, well, what are Canadians willing to pay for dairy products with a traceability label on it, and what can we learn from that? And so knowing that there's an audience out there beyond the academic audience is really important to me, because it's, that's kind of, academics become academics, I think, partly because of the inquisitive nature of what they do, but also because they want to make a difference, like so many other people. And so knowing that there's an audience in the public sector, and people who are working in the policy space care about this research is important. I also found the conversations really useful from a learning point of view. So prior to becoming an associate dean, I taught a graduate class in agricultural policy in my academic home department. And in the conversations I had with some of the policy fellows, I talked about how I would do a policy brief assignment with the students. And those conversations changed how I did that policy brief to make it much more realistic for the students, so that when they were going onto the job market, when they were looking for that first step after their graduate school experience, they have a little more experience and a little bit of understanding around what it's like if you had to write a policy brief or had to contribute to a policy brief, and that quick turnaround time, and sort of, really focus, what's the 2793, what's the main message you want to get across, and don't convince the deputy on the basis of economics, but on the basis of some other issues. And so thinking about how we can give our students better experiences in and out of the classroom while they're at university, so that they can make contributions later. And that creates a bit of a network effect that I think speaks to the advantage of some of the programs that we have here at Guelph and other universities, obviously, as well. I think the other pieces that I took away from the conversations, and especially Elizabeth, thinking about how we switched from in-person to virtual, because in the in-person we would typically do one-on-ones, and with the virtual it would be a group, and the conversations were always, regardless of the format, were always informative. But you got a better sense of the projects that people are working on, the issues and the policy issues that people are interested in. And also the way they go about approaching some of those problems. So it's not just what's, the immediacy of I've got to deal with a policy issue X, but ways that people who are working in that policy space in the public sector approach some of those problems can be really informative to help shape how can research be made, how can research be better mobilized to fit within that landscape of how people approach policy in the public sector. And I think the last point, and I've tried to emphasize this throughout my comments, is the importance of interdisciplinary approaches to dealing with policy analysis. There's many different ways to approach these problems, and we do have to be mindful of those different approaches and the different parts of the issue, so that if you are leaning on one particular policy option, it doesn't create some other unintended effect in a different part of the country, for instance. So I'll stop there, and I'm really interested to hear what the fellows have to say.
Thanks so much, John. It's fantastic to hear. To your first point, it's one of the things that when we first started this program 3 years ago, in our earlier questions, we discussed the issues of incentives, and particularly academic incentives being misaligned with some of the work that needs to happen for better policy alignment, for knowledge mobilization. And so when we first started this program, I was worried that, we were going to find that people were too busy, that, because of this lack of alignment with incentives, that they wouldn't be able to take part in these conversations. And that is so counter to what we found. So to your first point, I think so many, we've involved over 150, close to 200 faculty in these conversations to date. And they have, every single one of them has been so excited to take part in these. They feel that they've gotten so much out of it. So yes, the incentives aren't there, but you're right. The enthusiasm, the curiosity, the willingness to take part in these conversations is so prevalent and so amazing. I mean, it's just so wonderful to see from our perspective as we organize this program that there is so much enthusiasm on both sides. And all that's needed is a program like this, or a mechanism to make those conversations easy, to make them happen, to make the right linkages so that the dialogue can happen. So thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Katie, would you be willing to talk a little bit about some of the key highlights of your experience in the program?
For sure, very happy to do so, Elizabeth, because I found the Policy Fellowship Program really rewarding and inspiring. I joined the program with two lenses, given the dual nature of my work right now for this year at least, which is the food safety regulatory and science lens, but the other was more from the food innovation lens, which is product development and business development. And just to give you my examples, from the regulatory side, I connected with really multidisciplinary faculty who are working on the research topics that we are currently using to make the regulatory decisions in the food safety world, but without, understanding that there is active work going on. So it was really neat to see, real-time research on certain products, high-risk products, pathogen research, climate change work in relation to microbiology. So very good to have that dialogue. And also to further that, we discussed how the challenges are in front of us as regulators and what could be a better mechanism of interaction between regulators and researchers. And to that, I met with a behavioral scientist, and through that discussion, it was very good to dive further into consumer behavior patterns and how those get influenced. And here in Manitoba, we're working on drafting new regulations. So it gave me really good food for thought as to, we're trying to make these changes in the regulations. How are we best considering the behavioral science to inform those decisions? So in the end, there will be a smoother change and a better adoption of these changes. So it was really good to get that perspective, which otherwise we may not have touched from my end. And from the other side, from the food innovation side, I had extremely beneficial conversations. I started off meeting with the director of the Guelph Food Innovation Center, and as I mentioned, I'm working with the Food Development Center in Manitoba, and we're evolving our business model. So it was really good to discuss with the Food Center in Guelph as to how the model there has evolved, what some of the challenges have been, how the success is being measured. And this was really a direct correlation to my current work, and I really appreciated the timing of those conversations. And again, in the absence of this platform, I would not have the opportunity to connect with so many different people at the same time. I want to give another example, sorry, because I'm so excited about this, and there were so many great connections, and I want to highlight a few at least. I spoke with the department chair, Dr. Deiser, and through those conversations on food innovation and new business ideas, she connected me with the associate vice president of research and the director of OMAF for our University of Guelph agreement. And those conversations were so valuable because they were really open to share their key performance indicators, which in my role, working on the strategic plan of my new functional areas, it was so important and so beneficial to have that open dialogue to learn about the challenges. And I found throughout this course, all the faculty I spoke with, they were so open to share their ideas. And it was just not, you have a dialogue and then you end it. You left all of those conversations, like John mentioned, I was taking notes as to how the other areas in my department could also benefit from making connections. So I shared it with other colleagues who were not part of this program, but I said, you need to speak with so-and-so in Guelph. So it was just a really encouraging experience overall and really positive. So thank you again for this opportunity and for creating this platform where such an open dialogue can occur on really, really key issues, and we all can have really good takeaways and more food for thought for our work. So thanks.
No, thank you, Katie. Thank you to all of you. It's one of the wonderful things about this program, I think, is, as you said, we truly see it as just a starting point. It's a way to meet a few select others at the university to learn more about their work, but to make connections both within your organization, to others at the university, to others who work in agri-food, other decision makers, other fellows. As John said, we've moved, as we moved online, the size of the program has grown. We've moved from solely one-on-one meetings between faculty and fellows to meetings that might include multiple fellows who have similar questions to meet with that faculty member. And that also supports networking among other fellows, other decision makers in the space who might not otherwise have had the chance to meet. So no, I appreciate that. Thank you, Katie. Nardia, I'm going to turn to you next. If you can tell us a little bit about some of the highlights from your experience in the program.
So first of all, I want to say that one thing we've raised throughout the discussion today is the whole question of linkages. And I have to say that this fellowship program is probably one of the best tools for even starting those linkages. So that's what I found. Some of the highlights for me was the breadth of the work being done at Guelph. Not just on agri-food, but the fact that they had such a broad engineering program. That really came across with some of the profs I met there. I was intrigued by some of the work being done with the application, of course, of nuclear techniques for agriculture. And one of these examples that kind of resonated with me was some work being done by Bruce Power and University of Guelph on controlling red pepper weevils in greenhouses with nuclear techniques instead of using pesticides. Because one of my questions on the fellowship was reduction of toxic chemicals in agriculture. The other thing with reduction of pesticides was seeing some of the work being done on introducing biobeneficial insects to like a parasitic wasp, to control stink bugs instead of using chemicals. And one thing that followed up from this is they were having, and I mean, like Katie, this would be important to you, they were having trouble getting connections at the federal CFIA for the right people who were doing the permits and things like that. So I was able to talk to some of our people within and try and get the right contacts for that. And that was a two-person meeting. So the other person on there was always also interested in that, and he was able to apply this or use this contact information for some work he was trying to do as well. I also found out that about agri-food issues. In some of the work being done by Guelph and other countries where they need to desalinate to get water for irrigation. And that actually is one of the things that small modular reactors might be used for in some of these countries for desalination. And also an application to have fresh produce in the north where you could power greenhouses and things like that. The work on animal feeds that cause lower methane production had such a direct climate change link. So I was impressed by that, and did ask our methane, policy people. Like I don't work directly on it, but I did encourage them to reach out to University of Guelph when they were looking to develop new policies. And one thing that was helpful to me, one of the profs I spoke to in engineering told me that there was information I could get from Guelph on flooding, because flooding is a big thing everywhere. I mean, I was seeing it in BC and whatever, but with every industry, when they're doing their proposals for environmental assessments, we want to make sure they do a proper flooding risk assessment. So I was able to find out, about some of the technologies used in agriculture and, what we could tap into when ready to develop guidance. So so I really enjoyed my whole experience and the candor and the friendliness of all the people that I had the opportunity to meet with.
Thank you so much, Nardia. I'm so thrilled. I mean, I always love hearing about people's experience in the program, but I'm so glad that you took so much out of it and that it was such a positive experience. It's I often wish I could be a fly on the wall in every single one of these conversations. I think I would just learn so very much. So we're going to turn to Bernard for a last comment on this. Can you tell us a little bit about, what were some of the highlights of your experience in the program? How have you been able to use the information that you learned in your work?
One of the key highlights, and I'm pretty much repeating what everybody said, I think it's the diversity of research projects, of people with different backgrounds that allowed me to have a better sense of what type of research is being done around in the food nexus. Traditionally, the type of shop I'm in government, we connect a lot with economists, either in Canada or internationally. But beyond that, I don't have a lot of time to explore or to know what's being done. So that program was really helpful for me to broaden my horizon and take the time to do that. Another thing that was interesting for me was to exchange with other either policy makers or people from industry and have a sense of the type of policy questions they have and the type of issues they're dealing with. Because I have a good sense of what's going on within the federal government in general, at least in ag. But beyond what is actually practically some of the issues faced in provinces or elsewhere was very useful and interesting. One thing related to my first point is that in my experience in the policy science interface, it's usually been creating relationships on a limited time basis, but very focused on a policy issue. So, for example, fisheries or water. But I think this program allows me at least to imagine networks that would last longer than my movement across policy files, because there's different types of career in the public service, but a lot of people are moving from policy file to other policy files, and the networks will not be the same. So there's a bit of investment in time to do to build and maintain a network, and sometimes you wonder if it's worth it. It's worth it, when you need it, but after that, it's gone. So it's a bit of a challenge. But I think this approach can lead me to imagine, okay, there are different people I can reach to, and I understand I am invited to do that and to explore other linkages, other networks. So a network of the possibility is nice. And one of the things that I learned, it's not been long enough to use all of that information, but one thing that was interesting is, I think it was at the end of the summer or a month or so after the fellowship, and I started to get interested for a number of reasons to the use of indigenous knowledge in science, and trying to imagine what it could mean in policy. And this is getting traction for obvious reasons in Canada, but also elsewhere. And trying to get a sense of what it actually means, and who's doing work around that was useful, and that was possible because of this program. Because by accident, I learned about the fact that Guelph is developing a learning program on that. So I connected with a few people. So that was really cool and useful. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Yes, it's to your point on networks, and to your first point about kind of finding others with similar questions. One of the things, as I said, we're now 3 years in, we've run 7 cohorts of this program, and we've seen a lot of themes emerging from the questions that people come in with. And we're moving now to an approach that will let us take those themes and better support networks around them. So what we'll be doing in the future is moving to cohorts that have a bit more of a theme to them, and also involving our alumni, our policy fellows who've taken part in previous cohorts in some of those discussions to support networking amongst fellows, past fellows, current fellows, and the faculty who are taking part. So no, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So we move now to our final question. And this is really about what works in this program. So we think that this model is really interesting and innovative one. It supports knowledge exchange. It touches on some of those issues that the challenges that we identified in the first question. And it's a way to really, as we said, build networks, build relationships, and support two-way exchange of knowledge. Hopefully get in at those decision points, addressing some of those timeline questions. So in your opinion, what in this program works? Like, what are some of the elements you could tease out that really make this work for you and your work? What are the transferable lessons that other programs that the Science Policy Interface could adopt? So Katie, I'm going to turn to you to answer this one first.
Sure, thanks, Elizabeth. And it's so encouraging to hear what you just shared about the themes for future cohorts, because we've all shared today how it helped us. But it's really encouraging to hear how on your end also you're collecting the information in terms of the questions that are coming to you, and then we see that translated into research activities. So there's a real-time benefit right there. So from my perspective, the policy fellowship model is undoubtedly very innovative, very interesting. And I think I remember you mentioning, Elizabeth, that this is only the third of its kind in the world. So in my mind, this program is a trailblazer in getting the discussion going in so many areas that we've all identified today in the challenges. And I feel this policy fellowship program is setting the stage for mitigating some of those challenges and bridging those gaps that we earlier discussed when we were covering the first question today. So, given the flexible nature of the program, what really helped me was that you weren't limited to the questions that you asked at the beginning of the program. You had the flexibility to dive deep into the topics. And this to me is a really transferable skill or almost a principle that we could take into so many of other linkages that we have with academia, for example, here in Manitoba. When we discuss topics, do we have to discuss just based on that agenda, or how do we get the conversation broader, which can sometimes on surface appear a bit daunting because you're going all over. But if you're open-minded and willing to really dig deeper into the issues, it can really set the stage for public sector work in developing the policy functional areas in terms of our new mandates. And during the pandemic, of course, we couldn't meet in person, but the organizers, you all did such a great job in keeping the dialogue going virtually. And this was also another transferable skill, that how do we meet and connect and engage virtually and continue doing so, as we move back into our areas and graduate, if you will, from this program. And like Bernard mentioned earlier as well, to hear about the other policy issues that are brought to the table. There were so many new areas that I gathered just by listening into the other policy fellows' conversation with the faculty that we were paired with. So it's broadened my thinking, and it's definitely given me more perspective in my job to consider or dive further into those issues as I work in my functional areas. So I really feel other science policy programs will and should benefit from adopting such a platform, and really kudos to Guelph to setting the stage like this in Canada. I would be really encouraged to see this, being expanded across industry, academia, government platforms that we have. We definitely need more of these communications where we come in inquisitive and we remain inquisitive because you're learning so much more and you're finding more areas to dive into. And when we leave a program like this, we're leaving with excellent connections. And I personally felt invigorated, and will continue to connect with the people I spoke with, and also some of the other connections that were made. So really broad and really long-lasting impact on the work, I must say. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Katie. You're very kind, but I agree. I mean, I think that this model has a lot going for it. So I'm really glad to hear that those were some of the things that worked for you. I'm going to turn now to Nardia. Nardia, what are the elements of this program that worked best for you?
All right. So first of all, I'd like to echo a lot of what Katie said, so I won't repeat them. But what I like the fact that I had some one-on-ones, because I was kind of unique in my sort of cohort, because I was a little more technical, and I was working on a topic that not many people were working on. So I appreciated the one-on-one so I could do a deep dive into my areas of interest. But I also liked the smaller group. I didn't like the really large group sessions. I liked the group maybe 2 to 3 people, because there was more relation, there was a bigger relationship between our questions, and also we got to learn from each other, and we were able to maybe help each other as well as the professor that we were speaking to on a particular subject. And the big thing about the fellowship is that I think it really increases the potential for collaborative work with the university that benefits so many people, all the players like the government, the academia, the other groups. And I'm a big, I like to really help young people because it's been a hard time for young people with COVID and the economic situation with jobs and things like that. So the fact that collaboration resulting from this fellowship can help young people so that they get access to do new and interesting projects that have application. It's an investment in our future, and I really like that aspect that could result from the fellowship program. So thank you again for allowing me to participate and also to be part of this panel.
Well, thank you again so much. I think your point on students, young professionals, HQP is so important, and in finding ways to involve them in these discussions. I mean, I think that we touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's a great networking opportunity for them to get to meet fellows, to learn about what the priorities are. So certainly further involving some of our students and young professionals in these discussions is going to be very important, I think, into the future. Bernard, I'd like to turn to you. What about this program do you think works best?
Well, there are a number of things that were said, so I'll focus on two things that work particularly for me. So one thing is having or sensing that I have the permission to connect with people I met only briefly to help identify where certain types of knowledge might be or what research might be done correctly. I think that's invaluable. As in doing research, knowing where to start is sometimes the hardest barrier. And related to that, the fact that it is not limited to specific disciplines. And of course, the agri-food is by nature a multidisciplinary, or should be. But that is very important and very useful, I think, to get a better sense of how the different issues are understood and addressed through different disciplines. So I'll leave it at that. So those are the two striking features, I think, for me.
Thanks so much, Bernard. I'm so encouraged to hear this kind of the interdisciplinary piece coming through so strongly in all of your comments, because it's one of the things that I think I've heard from each of you. It's so needed, and it's something that I think that is wonderful to be able to offer. So, John, I'm going to turn to you for the last word on this topic. What do you think works best about this program?
I mean, I think when we were meeting in person, the 1 hour one-on-one worked really well, but I also saw that the group interaction worked really well. So both of those I thought are like critically important. Having the FaceTime, doing an exchange over email just doesn't cut it. It's actually seeing people, whether virtually or in person. The other thing that works really well for me, or I think is a huge asset or benefit of the program, is its ability to connect networks of people. So every policy fellow that I met, I'd never met before, and some were in agencies I've never had any interaction with before. And I may not necessarily be working directly in an area that is in their wheelhouse, but they might have to access expertise that I might know some people. So those connections of the networks of people, I think, help us cast a much broader net that allows us to scale how we're able to disseminate that knowledge and help make those connections so that we can actually work better as a community around integrating science with policy.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks so much to each of our panelists for coming today, for talking about your experience, what you've learned. I have learned a lot from talking to you, and it's really great to hear about, what has worked, what has not, and what can be applied in other programs, other disciplines about this. So we have at this point 10 minutes left, 12 minutes left, I suppose, in our session. So I'd like to turn it over to the audience to see if you have any questions. So please feel free to pop in the Q&A section any questions that you have, either for us about the program, or for each of the panelists, for one in particular or all, about their experience in the Policy Fellowship Program, or any of the comments that they have made today. So while we're waiting for questions to come in, I'd like to start our panelists off with one, and we'll move to other questions as they do come in. So, I mentioned before, I think food and agriculture is a really interesting area that this program focuses on because it is so incredibly complex. There's so many players, there's so many areas, layers of jurisdiction that touch on this. And then there's issues, as I said, from climate change. There's supply chain issues and how those have been affected by the pandemic. There's labor and employment challenges. There's so much that touches on the food system, and needs and priorities that differ across the country as well. So, as we've talked about, this program really is meant to be kind of a starting point. So in your view, is there anything else that's needed to continue these conversations that we've talked about today, to continue to create opportunities for dialogue and knowledge sharing between organizations, amongst organizations in this kind of complex sector? So I guess my question boils down to, where do we keep working in agriculture and food, and where is it important to continue to turn our attention to go next? So I'm going to open the floor to any of our panelists who'd like to comment on that question.
Well, maybe I could try. I think it's beyond this program, but that program can certainly help. Over time, and with the food systems approach emerging as a framework to look at different issues, and by talking to a number of people across different countries, what I realize more and more is how socially underestimated those issues are. It seems like agriculture is a bit folkloric sometimes, and I think there's some kind of work to be done to make our fellow, not fellows here, but society realize how important is food. A problem, a solution, a fundamental thing in relation to a number of things. So the program, I guess, emphasizes that, the connections, but I think the challenge is really to beef it up so that we don't take it for granted. I mean, the food system.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bernard. You're right. It's so complex. In 12 minutes, it's not really, it's not a challenge that we can cover solutions to in 12 minutes. Any other thoughts that panelists would like to share on that question? What else might we need?
One thing that I think about quite often these days is how high-tech agriculture and food is becoming. You can layer digital agriculture, you can layer all sorts of physical technologies, but also digital technologies, and increasingly biological technologies on top of agriculture. I mean, we're starting to see the whiffs of the cellular agriculture revolution that are happening. And so what happens when we layer those technologies that are emerging on top of the food system? And I really appreciate Bernard saying that, we do have to take that systems approach to this, because those emerging technologies and the new ways of doing things in agriculture are all addressing particular issues. But where does that impact other parts of the food system? And how does that actually affect Canadians as a whole, both either producers or as consumers? To Bernard's point, and I think this is an unfortunate set of circumstances for many Canadians. I think they take for granted access to food until they don't have that access. And we're beginning to see some implications of that in regions that have had some just catastrophic flooding, where parts of British Columbia are cut off, and we're seeing shortages on shelves. And so technology comes into that in some ways, and I think we don't quite. I think some people understand the full implications of that, but I think we've just barely seen the tip of the iceberg in terms of what the food system will look like in 25 years. And I think we need to be thinking about that now rather than 15 or 20 years from now.
Thanks so much, John. No, I appreciate your point about, the role of technology. It's incredibly complex, but there's so much possibility, I think. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Katie or Nardia, is there, would either of you like to comment on or add on to what's been said so far?
Sure. I can go quick. Oh, maybe Nardia is speaking, but she's on mute.
No, I was gonna say I could comment quickly. Like, for the sort of area I'm engaged in with small modular nuclear reactors, the micro ones for the north. Like, once there's more power in the north, like I could see, the potential for greenhouse production of food up there, because there's always a problem with fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, maybe even like fish farming and things like that. So I think it could be a future application of small micro reactor technology in the north, creating more energy and heat that makes the quality of life better up there.
Thank you, Nardia. And Katie, over to you for the last word.
Sure. Just to build on, the topic of security came up, and during this fellowship too, what I gathered was it's so multidimensional, and sometimes when we look at reports, they cover 2 or 3 policy areas, or research only looks at. But then if you're presenting that information, and we know consumers and public is looking at that information, is seeking more clarity in that area. So how could we do further collaborative publication work in those areas, so that clear information is going out there and science is doing its job of presenting all the facts. And similarly, from food innovation side, consumer trust will become a very important factor. Like we all know in plant protein sector, or in alternative protein sector, for example, we're talking about cell grown or cellular meat technologies, and there is apprehension in consumers, in general public, on those technologies. So how do we get to the forefront of it, so that we're not reacting to industry coming out with those products, and then we're catching up and saying, well, these are the facts around it. How do we work simultaneously to the innovations that are happening in the agri-food sector? So just some of my thoughts, and I'll stop here.
Elizabeth, if I may add something,
Of course,
maybe we're
please.
looking for something practical, so maybe a suggestion, and I think you're starting to do things around that. So one thing about the program is certainly the possibility we have to think aloud with between academia and policy, and sometimes it's not about immediate problems, but I think that has value going forward. And as John mentioned, the food system is going to evolve. The issues are going to change, but staying on top of it, so to speak, and thinking about what that means is very important. And there's not a lot of space to do that. I think in policymaking, it's always about the current crisis. Most of the time, it is. So, anyways, just a suggestion, maybe.
I appreciate that, Bernard. I appreciate all of your thoughts. I think you're right. Being proactive versus reactive is certainly something that's important and yet incredibly difficult to do. So we have 2 minutes left. Not seeing any questions. I think I'm going to close us out there. An enormous thank you to our panelists for coming to this conference, for speaking, for sharing your experience in the Policy Fellowship Program, and to attendees as well for listening to us talk about this program, what works. I hope that you've learned something that you can take and apply in your own work at the Science Policy Nexus. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, to contact me at the University of Guelph, and I'd be thrilled to talk about it more. So Thank you to all of you. Thank you to our attendees. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
everyone.
everybody.